And welcome everyone to JBiz 5th annual It's All Business event hosted by Jmore, a chance to meet some of Baltimore's business leaders, hear their stories and what has led them to success, how current economic conditions have affected their businesses, and what the last 2.5 years have revealed to them about their businesses. Should be very interesting. We'll have 4 speakers in all, but before we meet them, I'd like to offer a warm and enthusiastic thank you to our sponsors for today's event, which include the Ivy Bookshop, Jason Perlow Home Team at Sotheby's, Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program at CCBC, the Gourmet Girls, Kitchen Saver, Our House, Seawall Development, Levinson Bros, and of course, the law offices of Memphis Brow. And now I'd like to ask Lauren Ziegler, speaking of Memphis Brow, to share a few comments. Lauren is of counsel at Memphis Brow, where she represents startups, emerging and mature private companies, and investors in a variety of corporate securities and business law matters. She regularly assists clients with mergers and acquisitions, capital raises, security laws compliance, technology transactions, entity formation and governance, joint ventures, business structuring, and contract management and negotiation. She's a former member of the advisory board of GEM, that's the Girls Empowerment Mission, spelled GEM, and in 2019 was appointed by Governor Larry Hogan to the Park Advisory Commission. She's also a recipient of the Daily Records Leadership in Law Award. Lauren, I got through it, and you're up.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Jmore, for your work in putting on this great event. As I'm sure everyone here today knows, business ownership is not for the weak of mind or heart. As entrepreneurs, you've all taken the difficult steps in moving from ambition to action, and your businesses have the power to strengthen the communities around you. Memphis Brow was founded on the idea of practicing the law differently and being a true strategic partner with our clients. We pride ourselves on being a different kind of law firm, and we've seen firsthand in everything from scaffolding to salad dressings, how every business owner faces unique challenges and opportunities, and how every business owner brings a unique perspective to their field. I hope this evening's program will be educational and inspire everyone attending today. Thank you again to our panelists and to Jmore.
Lauren, thank you very much, and I'm sure it will be. And now my genuine thanks to another colleague and friend, Rod Bourne, who will say a few words to us. Rod is the founder and lead ninja of Downset Lead, a strategic consulting group focused on helping organizations grow their businesses and people through coaching, training, and mentoring. He is also the project director for Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program in Baltimore through CCBC. In the community, Rod serves as a mentor and a coach. He's the past president and a current board member of the MA and PA Heritage Trail Foundation, and in 2008 founded Anna's Guys, a collection of men who work with abused and sheltered children. Rod, as always, thank you for your support, and please say a few words to us.
Hey, Gary, thanks so much. Really appreciate being here with you and the Jmore team. I want to welcome everyone to this fantastic program. Really looking forward to hearing everything. And yes, please, if you know of anybody who is interested in learning more about the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program, we love to have people come through and work on their growth plan. It's an amazing program, and I'm very proud to be with it. Gary, thanks so much. Again, always proud to be partnering with you.
Thank you, Rod. I appreciate that. Now let's start off our program with our speakers. We'll start off with a one-on-one first, and then we'll go to a panel a little bit later. It'll be a panel of 3. Our one-on-one is with someone who describes himself on his LinkedIn page as a lucky husband, a stoked dad, humble author, passionate speaker, and social entrepreneur on a quest to understand how small ideas become powerful movements. He's interested in uniting rather than dividing, and has made it his life's mission to do something about that. Please welcome Thibault Manekin, partner at Seawall, as our one-on-one guest here today. Thibault, welcome. How are you?
Gary, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I love that shirt, and I love that description, by the way, that you put up there on LinkedIn. You know, that's a business site, obviously, but it was so personal and profound at the same time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I think it's interesting, Thibault, you and I had a chance to talk with one another a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. This event actually was supposed to be done about 3 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I
Right.
fell ill. Everything's good now. But I think after talking with you, I think it's really important to, if we're going to go forward and I'm going to ask you questions, we have to understand who you were, like what your journey has been to how you got to where you are today. So that's my first question to you, is just give us a little bit of a background as to your how you were raised in Baltimore and Pikesville, and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah, so and thank you so much for putting together these important conversations. Thank you for hosting. I'm glad you're feeling better
Thank you.
and excited to hop in. And this can be just a little bit of a conversation, but I grew up here in Baltimore in kind of Mount Washington area. And my mom was from France and my dad grew up here in Baltimore in Pikesville. And from a very young age, I had these two really kind of formative experiences that lit two burning questions in my head and my heart. And those two questions are, why are we so divided as human beings? And what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? My mom came from a small village in France and she moved to Pikesville. And when she started having kids, she made sure that we understood that this world was this vast, powerful, amazing place full of inspiring people, and that you really needed to learn to walk in the shoes of others before passing judgment. She made sure that we were always forced out of our bubbles and out of our comfort zones and asking important questions, and more importantly, listening deeply every step of the way. So, with that upbringing and with these two burning questions, I spent, my life as a teenager wrestling to figure out an answer and even a solution to them, and kept striking out. So finally, I graduated from college and I was further away from answering those questions than when I'd started asking them at 10 years old. And we have two choices in life, Gary. We can sit on the sidelines hoping that someone else is going to do the heavy lifting, or we can understand that there's a problem or an opportunity out there that the more and the deeper we immerse ourselves in it, the more likely there is to success. So I don't know, at 22 years old with two buddies, we started an international nonprofit called Peace Players. And the idea is that we would go to war-torn countries, deeply divided countries, and we would use the sport of basketball with young kids to bridge divides, develop leaders, and hopefully over time change perception. So we raised $8,000 from friends and family, which at 22 years old felt like $1 million, right?
Sure.
Enough to get on a plane to Durban, South Africa, right after the fall of apartheid. And we started dribbling basketballs in black townships and white suburbs, the idea of really bringing kids together. And the program really took off, kind of right time, right place. We built it in a really inclusive way. And I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 months into the experience, we're just about out of money. We're doing everything we can to raise money all over the place. And we get a call from Nelson Mandela's foundation. And they say that President Mandela is a huge believer in the power of sports to unite, and he wants to become our largest sponsor. So we go from very little credibility and very little money to Nelson Mandela's name behind us and money behind us. And from that point on, the program just kind of exploded. We were invited to replicate it all over the world, in the Middle East with Israeli and Palestinian kids, in Cyprus and Northern Ireland, where we already had a program going. Ron Shapiro, legendary sports agent here from Baltimore, came on and really provided incredible guidance as the chair of our board from that kind of inception. So, I ended up back in Baltimore, and I'm happy to dive into that story as well, somewhat unexpectedly, but I've been in constant chase of the answer to those two questions of why are we so divided and what are the creative ways we can bridge those divides.
So it's an interesting thing, Thibault, and thanks for sharing that, because, as your mother said, you have to learn to walk in other people's shoes. And you went 5,000 miles halfway around the world to war-torn countries, as you mentioned, South Africa, Middle Eastern countries, Cyprus, et cetera, Northern Ireland, to learn to walk in other people's shoes. But, other people have shoes right here in Baltimore. And you told me that there was a time in your life where you had no desire to return to Baltimore at all, which I find interesting because, like I said, other people do have shoes in Baltimore. So my question is, what inspired you to come back to Baltimore at that point?
It's a beautiful question. So in 2006, unexpectedly, I ended up back in Baltimore. I was, to a certain extent, catching my breath. I was living out of a suitcase and a backpack, traveling all over the world, helping to set up the infrastructure for this program that was growing really rapidly. And I was out at my parents' house for dinner, and I crashed in this bed that I'd slept in thousands of times, and I couldn't close my eyes. There was something that was nagging me that I couldn't wrap my head around. And I spent the whole night tossing and turning. And eventually, as the sun came up, I just got in my car, and I just, without a destination in mind, Gary, I just started driving. And I ended up in West Baltimore on the corner of Pennsylvania and North Avenue, the intersection that 9 years later in 2015 would be the epicenter of the Freddie Gray uprising. And I pulled my car over the side of the road, and I had this moment where I kind of like flinched, right? I had been made to believe my entire life growing up that this wasn't a neighborhood that I was welcome in, and that it wasn't a neighborhood that I'd be safe in. But I heard this narrative all over the world, right? And I understood that only when we're able to get out of our comfort zones, only when we're able to do things that society tells us we shouldn't do before we're able to experience them on our own, are we able to see the things that we might be missing. And so I had this flinch moment, but I jumped out of my car anyway, and I started walking around, and look, I saw all of the things that society told me I would see: the collapsing buildings, the vacant homes, the liquor stores on the corners, the drug dealers, the clients of those drug dealers nodding off at the intersections. But I knew that there was so much more to this neighborhood that I hadn't been able to see yet. I knew there was so much more to this city that I hadn't seen yet. And as I continued to walk, I had two realizations. The first is that America, and more specifically Baltimore, our city, is more divided than all of these so-called war-torn countries where I'd spent so much time and energy and enthusiasm. But that we have an inability here to have open and honest conversations with people who don't look and feel like us about our similarities and differences. It was the truth, and I knew it in that moment. The second realization I had was that real estate, the control and ownership of land, is the most powerful connected industry on the planet. It literally touches every single one of us, every single moment of every single day. Even with that power and connectivity, it's done more to divide us historically than actually bring us together. And so I'm a huge believer in the importance of reimagining industries, taking things that the world's known to be one way and flipping them upside down, where we're actually leading with our purpose over our profit. And so I had these two realizations, and I had this moment of like anger and embarrassment grow within me, right? Here I am 3 miles away from where I grew up, in a part of town that I'd never gone to because society told me I wouldn't be safe in. And I was mad at myself for having listened for all those years, for having missed the challenges that our city has and the opportunities that our city has, and just like sitting on the sidelines thinking that somebody else would eventually try to do something about it. And I was also mad and embarrassed that I had missed this really important concept around real estate and its power and how divisive it's actually been. My family was in the real estate business growing up, and I wanted nothing to do with it. Those two realizations led me to understand that there is so much beautiful work to be done here in our city. There's so many amazing people who are rolling up their sleeves, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I wanted to be a part of it in a way where we were actually like reimagining an industry. And for us, that was going to be the real estate industry.
So you started with a partner, I believe, Seawall Development. I'll ask you about the name in a minute, but I wanted to find out, you talk about reimagining the real estate industry. It sounds good on paper. How do you actually reimagine it? What did you do differently in the industry?
So I think we take great pride in none of the projects that we've done over the last 15 years have been our idea, right? They've been as a result of deeply listening to the communities that we're blessed and honored to work in and work for, right? Unfortunately, real estate historically has happened to communities, right? And we wanted to change that narrative where real estate would happen with and for communities. So I think it was like a fundamental shift in like why we woke up every morning. And so we started to ask ourselves, our first big project was around creating discounted apartments for teachers and collaborative office space for the nonprofits who are underpinning the success of the city school system. A project called Miller's Court is in a neighborhood called Remington, which most people probably know today. Our house is there, and we've done a lot of other projects. But 15 years ago, if I were to ask most of the people on this call if they'd been to Remington before, I didn't know about the neighborhood when we started working on our first Miller's Court project. And, you know, we ended up buying this 100,000 square foot vacant abandoned building that had been, hadn't had anybody in it for about 30 years. Every other developer had walked through it and then passed on the opportunity because they never thought the neighborhood would kind of come around. And we knew that the teachers and the nonprofits were all in on this concept. And that if we brought the idea to life in a really inclusive way, if we built it from the inside out, then perhaps it could grow, get the momentum. Perhaps it could become a movement of its own, and be a little bit of the catalyst that would allow other inclusive opportunities to start to take place. And we worked hand in hand with those teachers and those nonprofits, and we worked with the community to make sure that every step of the way they had a seat at the table. And it turned into the country's first Center for Educational Excellence, and it was a little bit of the spark for the kind of work that we would end up doing. We've done several of those around the country and throughout Baltimore. We've done some kind of creative adaptive reuse of charter schools in some old factories. We're doing Lexington Market today, which you could spend a little bit of time talking about. Again, all of these projects have been driven by the communities that we're working in, and the end users are going to be the occupants of the space at the end of the day.
So let's talk a little bit about the Lexington Market project, because that is in the news all the time. Lexington Market, obviously one of the iconic structures or places where Baltimore goes to eat and commune, and, you know, it's been here for over 150 years. We know the history. We know, you know, how over time it's been degraded, etc. What's the plan? And I know it's already up and running, but how did you approach the plan? Put it that way. And are you happy with the results so far?
Yeah, so Lexington Market. So everybody over 40 years old on this call has a Lexington Market story, I'm convinced.
Absolutely.
My dad used to tell stories about his dad taking the trolley down to Lexington, and you didn't start your weekend on Saturday until you'd been there, right? And that part of West Baltimore has just, you know, fallen on hard times over the last couple decades or so. And nobody wants to see Lexington Market die on their watch. And so this RFP came out, a request for proposals, and Seawall got wind of it. We ended up submitting a response and got hired to help lead the transformation of Lexington Market. And we were really clear with the city that once they awarded us the project, we didn't want them to say anything to anybody. And we asked them for 9 months where we were just going to go throughout the entire city of Baltimore, in a different neighborhood, in a different community, almost every night, just listening at a community association meeting. And we'd have about an hour, and for 5 minutes, we would basically introduce the project, introduce ourselves, and ask people, what would it take for you to fall in love with Lexington Market again? Because most people don't, a lot of people who used to go there don't go back anymore for a number of different reasons. And those conversations were amazing. And we took notes and we listened. And at the end of that period, we went back to the city and said, we're all in. Not only do we want to do this project, but it has to happen. But there are some criteria. There's a few like North Stars, some guiding principles that we all have to agree to if we're going to do this. The first one was that if we're going to take this endeavor on, we have to understand that it's not a real estate project, that this is an opportunity to prove that a single building brought to life in a really inclusive way can unite our city at one of its most divided times. If that can be the reason why we wake up every morning to tackle this project, then we believe it can be a huge success. The second thing, and probably the number one thing that we heard throughout all of our listening, was that if people of Baltimore and the surrounding areas are going to go back and support the market and the businesses down there, those businesses, the vendors in the new market, have to represent the beautiful diversity of our city. Today, less than 5% of the businesses in the existing market are Black-owned businesses. Very few of them are city resident-owned businesses. And it was a clear message in all the neighborhoods that had to change. So we took notes and we started to implement the design, and we had tons more focus groups and town hall meetings as information continued to come in. And you know, we started construction, we closed financing the month before the COVID pandemic hit.
Wow.
So this is so we're basically sitting here with a $45 million investment, right? At a time when none of us know if we'll ever go back and gather in spaces that hold thousands of people at once. Right. At a time when 50% of restaurants and food and beverage institutions around the country were closing, around the world were closing. Wouldn't know if they would ever open up ever again. And here we are under construction with no turning back. We had been so inclusive in the outreach. We had built such groundswell in those early meetings. We had made sure that we'd gotten so far out of our bubbles in the recruitment and the conversations about this project that when we announced the vendor application rounds, Gary, we had no idea if anybody would apply. And within, several months and, kind of fast forward today, we've had over 400 applications for the 50 available like vendor stalls that are in the market. 50% of those are Black-owned businesses. 50% of those are women-owned businesses. 50% are city resident-owned businesses. So, when you tackle these really complicated projects, which is kind of what we as entrepreneurs do, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur, you've kind of got, you're faced with what feels like a daunting task, maybe even an impossible task. When you're able to build a groundswell where everybody that the idea touches has the same sense of pride of ownership and authorship in what's getting created, I guarantee you from like lived experiences, that project has a significant better chance of taking off, of being even more impactful, of succeeding way past your wildest dreams and imaginations when you can be inclusive from the very beginning.
So in the interest of time, and unfortunately, we're short of it, but this is a conversation we should have again and a lengthier one. But I do want to say or ask you, since you look at things differently and you've trained yourself to look at things differently over time, what does the future of Baltimore look like to you?
I was sitting with Dave Bramble this afternoon for coffee. Dave is the developer who's getting ready to do the Harbor Place. If you think Lexington Market's a project in the city, Lexington Market is, or the Harbor Place is even more significant. It's not, Baltimore's success is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be a quick fix, right? This is a generational problem and opportunity that we have to tackle. And it spans all spectrums. And the one thing I tell people when they ask that questions is, or ask people when they ask me that question is, what are you doing, right? What comfortable bubble are you sitting in? Asking that question, what are you, too many people say, I won't go down to Baltimore anymore. When Lexington Market's open, I won't go visit it. That's the easy answer, right? And that's the answer that's going to continue to have Baltimore spiral when we sit on the sidelines hoping that other people are going to do the heavy lifting. There are so many opportunities out there, volunteer opportunities, helping young entrepreneurs get up and running, that we all have responsibilities to chip into and kind of create this next future generation of leaders that will spiral into more and more opportunities, more job creation, more people moving to the city, better education, and all of those components.
Well, I hope you're going to be around to see the fruits of that labor. I'm confident that you will. I really appreciate this conversation, Thibault. I really do hope that we can have a longer conversation about it, maybe at our house one day, which we were supposed to actually be there live and in person, but things happen. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you and what you've done for Baltimore.
Thank you, Gary.
Absolutely. That's Thibault Manekin, partner at Seawall. And again, many great projects the real estate development company has done, including what we were just talking about, Lexington Market. Before we get to our panel discussion, a quick reminder that Jmore's All About Business program is brought to you by our good folks at Nemphos Brow, offering big firm expertise and boutique service with lawyers experienced in all aspects of business and corporate law. For more information, go to nemphosbrow.com. That's spelled NEMPHOSBRAUE.com. And now to our panel, and you can see him right here live on the Zoom. Brett Cohen is the CEO and owner of Kitchen Saver. As the second generation owner of Kitchen Saver, he has grown the company since taking ownership in 2013 into a multi-state operation committed to providing customers and employees with a 5-star experience. He's been quoted as saying that the secret is to treat your employees like gold, so they treat your customers like diamonds. Brett and his family are active members of the Baltimore Hebrew congregation, and he currently sits on the board of governors for the Associated. Brett Cohen, that's a nice kitchen you have behind you. Thank you for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. And I'll get back to you in just a moment. Emma Snyder is the owner of the Ivy Bookshop and Bird in Hand Coffee and Books. I was just there last week, actually, had a chance to meet Emma in person. Thank you so much, Emma. She previously served as executive director of the Penn Faulkner Foundation, a graduate of Yale University, the University of Wisconsin as well, has taught in an array of places from elementary school in Louisiana to graduate students in Beijing, a native Baltimorean. We're happy to have you back. She's happy to be back surrounded by books. Emma Snyder, it was really great seeing you the other day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, delighted to be here, Gary.
Absolutely. And last but not least, my good friend, Matt Levinson, officially joined the team at Levinson's Funeral Homes in the year 2005. He grew up in Pikesville, attended Pikesville High School. When not in school growing up, Matt learned every job at the funeral home from the ground up. Matt now serves as president of the company, running day-to-day operations, building his vision on how Levinson's will operate to serve future generations, and constantly looking for ways to improve the experience for Levinson's families. Matt, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate
And
it.
Matt, let's start with you. You are the latest Levinson in a family business that dates back to the year 1892. I'll do the math real quick. That's 130 years. It spans now 5 generations. That is almost unheard of in the world, let alone anywhere we know of. What has been the key to the longevity of a 5-generation family business for 130 years?
Our family's very proud of 130 years. It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of different family members that played a very big role in growing our company. I would say that we had many family members over the years that were interested in joining the firm. We're dedicated to working day to day, and obviously we're in an industry that hasn't changed too much, and we're willing to change with the times like we've done over the last decades.
What was there ever a thought on your part, Matt, to do something else other than Levinson's?
So I would get that question when I was a kid all the time, and I would always say, no, I'm never doing that. I think deep down, I always knew I had a passion for it. And when I started working in high school and college, working with my dad and grandfather and uncle, it's special working with family. So I always knew I loved it.
Sounds good. Brett Cohen, let's move over to you real quick. You have an interesting story. Actually, everybody on this panel has an interesting story. But you were, back in the day, wanting to be part of the rabbinate. You wanted to join the rabbinate. In fact, you have a degree from Baltimore Hebrew University. You've been very successful at Kitchen Saver. That's quite a difference between those two careers. So what changed? What happened?
It's a great question. Actually, yes, I was considering going into the rabbinate, and honestly, I met my wife. We were married, and I realized that I really definitely wanted to be married to her instead of to a congregation. But really what happened was my father-in-law saw something in me that I didn't even know was possible. And he kept on asking me to come on board with the business. And really what it came down to was, do I really even want to go that route? I'd had friends who had been in family businesses, and 130 years is so impressive, but knowing Matt and his family, they're just a bunch of mensches. And I'm actually doing Matt's Aunt's Kitchen next month, just so everyone knows.
Oh, very good. Okay.
But more importantly, my father-in-law brought me in. He basically said to me, listen, I'm going to give you 2 years, give me a year and a half, and give me 6 months notice. And if it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. And I started off in the warehouse sweeping the floors, did inventory, learned everything about the business. It's the familiar story from the ground up. And what he really was doing was preparing me as his succession plan. So in 2013, when I acquired the company, I never realized how much I would actually love what I do for a living. And I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else now.
Well, but it is interesting, Brett, the one similar, or maybe one of the similarities between the rabbinate and being in business in terms of Kitchen Saver, you serve people in both positions. Mm-hmm. You know, in the rabbinate, you would serve the congregation, obviously, perhaps more spiritually, but you've said that, you look at your business as a customer service experience. You want to make sure that your customers are well taken care of over and above everything else.
And I think that's what separates us from other home improvement contractors and other companies that really do it. Our view or our vision really for our company is that we make beautiful spaces to create lasting memories. It's not about making a beautiful kitchen. It's not about making sure that your stove and your cabinets all operate properly. It's really about the kitchen being the heart of the home and the heart of the family. And when, well, listen, we all know about Jewish cooking and how important food is to us all. But at the end of the day, it really is about being inspiring our people and our customers to always be better and do better and have those beautiful places to be able to gather, and really family is everything.
Absolutely. And Emma Snyder, owner of the Ivy Bookshop and Bird in Hand Coffee and Books. Here you are, another interesting story, a lover of books and literature. We talked about your teachings and your administrative work in DC earlier, but you never even considered being an owner / entrepreneur until something happened. What changed your mind and put your career in that direction?
Yeah, well, I met the previous owners of the Ivy Bookshop, Ed and Ann Berlin, at the Baltimore Book Festival. I think it was 6 years ago now, and got to know them a bit and did some work with them with my old organization. But they looked at me and said, "Would you take over the business from us?" And so it was this suggestion externally. And my first instinct was, no, I can't possibly buy and run a small business. And it took about 15 minutes for me to go from that's an impossible thing to, oh my God, that's exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. So, but it took that sort of outside suggestion from someone else.
And you may have the toughest job of all, owning a brick and mortar bookstore in the age of Amazon. I mean, going up against, the online version of that. And then the other bricks and mortars, the Barnes and Nobles of the world, Borders in the past, Below, et cetera, et cetera. I know some of them aren't even around anymore. But my question is, how do you compete, the little Ivy Bookshop, against all these big major corporations?
Yeah, well, my answer is similar to what Brett was just saying, which is it's all about experiences and about sort of thinking of sort of the ways in which customers use books in their life and what books represent in their life. And so, I sometimes say kind of the transaction that is at the heart of our business is sort of selling the book. But what we're actually doing is sort of creating a space in which people can come together and meet other people who care about books, talk about books, the world of ideas that books represent. That if it's just about the transaction, it doesn't actually matter that we exist. What matters is that we create physical spaces in our lives where we create memories and experiences and the possibility for human connection. And there have to, be transactions or exchanges at the heart of that in order to anchor those things and make it sustainable. And that's how we view the independent bookstore. And I'd say that's one of the things that's true of independent bookstores generally, is that's often how the owner kind of views it, as that proposition of how do we create a healthy kind of business that will allow this to sustain into the future and create these experiences. And there's starting to be a resurgence against all odds. And that's a little bit of our narrative now. And we hope that speaks to something hopeful.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was down there last week, and I want to talk to you a little bit about your physical space there, which I think is tremendous. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But I wanted to go back to Matt real quick. Matt, one of the quotes on your website, which has always stuck with me, and I think your dad may have even said it on a video that we did for you years ago. And that quote is, "One generation teaches the next generation." And we talk a lot about doing the right thing and treating people the way that they want to be treated. Can you talk about that, the handing down from generation to generation, and how was that actually imparted to you, your dad, your grandfather, from your great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, et cetera?
Yeah, it starts when we were kids, just watching my dad and my grandfather just being in the community, taking care of people, how they talk to people. Just being a kid, watching my dad take phone calls at home, and how serious he was when he was talking to families, because he would get calls all the time. So I learned very early on the importance of what we do and the sensitivity around it. When I started working in the business, obviously I learned all the day-to-day. And then we start to, the next generation starts to teach them. When you're in a family business, the challenge is different generations. Everyone wants to put their stamp on it and they want to make changes. So you have to sort of find that balance, change with the times, but also keep your core principles.
And that's a great point. And Brett, let's toss that over to you actually, because while you're not a fifth generation business, you are a second generation business. And like Matt just said, every generation wants to, put their stamp, improve, make progress. How do you think you've done that in Kitchen Saver over the last, 8 or 9 years?
So it's really actually interesting. When I bought the company back in 2013, we were doing about 12 kitchens a month on average. Now we do about 60 kitchens a month. I was running appointments, sales. Basically, we were a very small company, and the way we kind of viewed ourselves was as a startup. And over the years, while we have grown, it really was about the people that we brought in. And that lesson had never been more apropos than really what happened during the pandemic. The pandemic taught us that, it really is about culture. It's about the people you work with every day. And it's really about the product you put out, meaning that you need to have a good company culture. You need to have a place where people want to be and want to work and really can embrace that. And I think that the next part about that having to do with having the right people in the right seats. And that means that sometimes it could be the right person, but the attitude or personality may not be right for your business. We want those people to be successful. We just want them to be successful elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Gotcha.
I want people who are on board with the mission and values of the company. And then at the end of the day, it really is about delivering. And when you mentioned earlier about our 5-star customer experience that we strive for, our philosophy really is about creating a 5-star experience for our employees and our customers. So when I really talk about treating our employees like gold, and recently we had a meeting for all of our installation team, and I made that comment, and I was interrupted by an installer who I've known for about 16 years now. And his comment to me was, Brett, but we're family. And that's exactly right. And that's the idea behind it. We are family and we treat people that way. So that way, at the end of the day, by the time we get to your house and we're delivering a product to your house, it's being installed by people who are taken care of, who care about the end result and also care about the company, the values and the mission of it. And I really think that's what separated us from so many other places as a next generation. You can talk about technology, you can talk about all those things, but I started really honing in on who I wanted to be and who I wanted to be there with me. And I think that has really been the secret sauce.
Secret sauce for you, Emma. I was pleasantly surprised when I came to visit you last week on Falls Road, a location that you have just moved into basically over the last couple of years. We can talk about the pandemic and that whole situation in a minute. But then you open the door to the outside of your building, and we walk down the steps, and there is this beautiful 3-acre garden, for lack of a better term, with beautiful trees and benches and things to do out there. It's really a very inviting place for people and families to come and read and just be with each other, for if nothing else. Talk a little bit about your acquisition of that property, because I think that's going to have a lot to do with your success.
Yeah, it was wonderful to host you there or just to show you around a bit. It's a spectacular property. It's located right on Falls Road at 5928, and it's just 3 blocks south of the location the Ivy had been in for 18 years when we moved, which was at the Lake Falls Village Shopping Center. And it's one of the observations I made to you is that when I bought the Ivy, I knew that the most transformative thing we could do at some point would be to find a property that would allow us to own our own home, essentially, and be there in the long term into the future. That would really stabilize us financially. And I didn't, but I also knew I would never want to move us out of our neighborhood. And so I wasn't really looking, but luckily I have, it's in a very sort of Baltimore twist, one of my very oldest friends we met in elementary school, and she loves browsing Baltimore real estate. And she just texted me one morning and said, there's a property available on Falls Road that looks like it could make a nice bookshop. And so I hopped in my car and I drove over. And the first thing I saw was the grounds that Gary's referring to. It's almost 3 acres. They're spectacular. And it used to be a meditation community church. And so they actually tended the property as part of their spiritual practice and built a meditation pathway that winds back through 7 cultivated gardens, each of which has a meditation bench, which can double as a reading bench. And then it has a beautiful lawn space and just a wonderful, it's all sort of runs along the side of the Jones Falls. And so it just has this incredible kind of natural, it is essentially a private park. When I walked onto the property for the first time, I just thought, this is implausible. That a building that is sort of significantly more space, but that has this kind of beautiful cultivated property is sitting here just a few blocks down the same side of the same street. And so I sort of set about then what ended up being a fairly long process of acquiring the building, renovating the building. We had to get it rezoned. So I got to learn a lot about kind of the way those local dynamics work. And it was an incredibly interesting process. But what emerged is this property that we think of as really a cultural and community space that's anchored by a vibrant bookstore. And so the bookstore sort of allows us to be there, and then it allows us to play with the space and invite people in all sorts of ways, where again, the transaction that is at the heart of sustaining the property is necessary, is sort of handled inside, but we can create all kinds of experiences on the grounds. And those things kind of working in tandem means we can experiment with inviting people in just to play games and picnic, and develop that relationship with the bookshop. One of the things I think I told you is we are a hotbed of kids' birthday parties now, which never had I just didn't know that that's something to do, but the community really has responded to that idea. And so you'll often see like groups of 11-year-olds like browsing books together happily, and then each of them gets a book as they leave as like their party favor. And that's the culture that we want to build, and it just sort of creates a wonderful spirit, but also helps again to create those relationships that can be passed down, that mean it both is sustaining to the business, but I think also kind of a really wonderful thing in the community.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'm going to get back to Brett and Matt in just a minute, but I wanted to hold up this headline from an article that I read in the Wall Street Journal today. I hope you guys can see it. I'm going to read it off real quick. The headline is, "How to Get Your Gamer Kid Reading This Summer." And so, Emma, this one is really for you. You know, there are so many distractions for kids these days, the social media, the gaming, just the digital world in general, that I'm fearful that kids don't pick up a book anymore and read. Yeah. But you just talked about the kids' birthday parties. So I guess the question is, how do you get kids to put down the iPhone and pick up a book?
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, but yes, absolutely. I'm fearful of that too. And it's one of the, I think, reasons I really love owning a bookstore is it feels like something meaningful to do in a world where I worry, you know, about many things, but among them, the ways that digital life is changing how we interact with one another and how we prioritize community and sort of proximity and with others sort of in our lives. And I think one of the basic answers to that is you offer actually authentically compelling reasons to put down the game, right? So if the bookstore, and that connects to what you were asking, you were highlighting in terms of our space, the space is really beautiful and it offers games outside. It's not that books are a thing you have to go and do that is sort of less obviously appealing, Dan, but it's something that's interconnected with things you want to do. You want to go and be in a beautiful space. You want to be outside. You want to play games. You want to socialize with your friends. And if we create spaces in our world that allow you to easily access that, and we put books at their center, then books can become a sort of more natural part of people's lives. And I think just so much of that question of sort of digital versus non-digital is creating easy ways and easy habits to rebuild that sense of sort of physical connection back into our lives. And especially in terms of the pandemic, like it was stripped away from us intentionally, and how do we rebuild it in ways that are easy and accessible to as many people as possible.
Gotcha, perfect. So let's do something a little different, guys. We just have a few minutes left. This is a little something that we haven't done in our past virtual events, but it's something that I like to call the lightning round, where we'll go around the panel and we'll ask 3 questions. Everybody will get the same question, and we'll see how these particular instances may or may not have affected your business. So the first question I want to ask is, how are current market conditions, meaning inflation, supply chain issues, et cetera, just everything that's going on in the world today, affecting your business? And what does that mean for your consumer? So with that, let's start with Matt Levinson real quick. Matt, how are the current market conditions affecting, what are you seeing now in terms of your families?
It probably affects us a little bit less than other industries. I mean, obviously, we're still purchasing caskets and other items, and it's harder to get them. Everything is more expensive. Our goal is look, funerals are expensive. So our goal is not to pass on all those additional expenses, which is very challenging. So we have to find other ways of lowering our overhead, and because, you know, it's important for us to keep our expenses down, our funeral costs down. And we're in the type of business that I can't ever tell a family, I'm sorry, I don't have a casket to provide you. So we have to overstock our merchandise, and
Mm.
we have to be creative how we do that, using different vendors. And but it's definitely challenging times for everyone right now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Brett, I want to turn over to you. Are you, I would think supply chain could be an issue. What are you seeing?
Supply chain has been it's been a roller coaster, as I say. Every day I equate it to going to a carnival and trying to hit a target in one of the games, but the target either goes down, up, to the side, and no matter what, you're never able to hit it, because when one thing becomes available, something else doesn't. So for example, wood is about 280% higher than it was at pre-pandemic levels, and wood
Wow.
makes cabinets. But you know, it's the funny thing, it's the little things that people forget about, like hinges, slides. Because I had a good relationship with my vendors, I'm at the top of the list
Mm.
when it comes to actually getting our products. But I can tell you that there's been deliveries where we were expecting things to show up on one day and then they're showing up 2 months later, or we're scrabbling just to get the smallest little things. And it really is interesting. We do our best to communicate with our customers, because really what I've learned is you don't always have to tell somebody what they want to hear, but you need to be able to tell them something. And we've really tried very hard to be communicating every few weeks. Right now, we're telling the average customer we're about 22 weeks out from day of contract. And
Wow.
sometimes that gets pushed out even more. What we found, as long as we're communicating clearly, the customer's okay. And really it's about their experience at the end, because I know that eventually we'll get the product in, but we don't want to start the job until we have everything in. So it makes it a lot better experience.
Mhm. Emma, how are current market conditions affecting your Ivy Bookshop?
Yeah, somewhat similar. I mean, supply chain has just been a bear the last few years, but that emphasis on communication, when the supply chain issues first started manifesting, but we didn't know that that's what it was. It was just this like inexplicable force of that, and sort of mail service as well for us, because we were suddenly during the pandemic shipping a lot of things out via USPS, and they weren't arriving and we couldn't figure it out. And so some of that was the learning curve for us. But what it settled into a supply chain, it's similar to what Brett's saying, where a publisher is telling us that'll be there next week, and then every week that'll be there next week, and it ends up growing into a 2 or 3 month process. And I think especially with something like a book that seems like it should be very simple, right? The acquisition of it, someone is seeking a copy of a Charles Dickens novel, and it's like, this has existed for 150 years, and however many forms, like how can it be that difficult to get? So it's been, some of that has been our own education about all of the steps in the supply chain that have been sort of altered, but then communicating the complexity of that to people without boring them, and also just conveying that we are trying to get the best information we can, and we've created new systems for doing that. We'll communicate as well as we possibly can with you, and we're okay if you make another choice. What we want to do is be as reliable as possible as we can in a circumstance where we don't control all the variables. We haven't yet gotten any inflation issues, but we hear they're coming, that it's just gonna be a wave that begins in about 6 months maybe.
Right. Well, in an inflationary environment, consumers are looking for value. They look for value in general, but certainly in an inflationary environment, they look for it. Matt, let's talk about that. How does Levinson's provide value to its families?
It's all about customer service, taking care of people. That's what we've been doing for 130 years. Just giving really good service, communicating with people. Obviously, our staff is key, but just trying, our goal is to wow every family. We want to satisfy every family, do whatever we can for them, hold their hand during the process. And there aren't many businesses anymore that can do that. So if it's, responding to emails at night, or just, we don't keep people on hold. It's all the little things that go a long way. Just good, solid customer service.
And Matt, while I have you real quick, it's interesting because you obviously serve the Jewish community. The Jewish community is interesting in that there are different sects of the Jewish community that observe differently. You've got the religious sect, the conservative, you've got Reform and others. So they may be looking for different things when it comes to end of life and funeral services. How do you manage that? How do you meet expectations for all the differences within the faith?
Very challenging. There aren't many organizations that serve the entire community. We're proud that we still, we've been doing this for a long time. We know our clients. We know what their needs are. We know if a more observant family calls us, what's important to them, and we just bend over backwards and do it. We try to be flexible, and there are some families that they don't want a traditional service. We try to personalize as much as they want to, but every single family is different, and we try to, figure out what they want and serve them.
Mm-hmm. Brett Cohen from Kitchen Saver, what's your value proposition?
Before I even say that, I just have to say, when it comes to Levinson's, I really believe, Matt, that you may be the secret sauce. I can't even tell you how many people have a Matt Levinson delivering Shiva chairs story that I've heard in like the last 2 years. And
He did it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you talk about
Thank
customer service and living it, that's it.
Totally agree.
So in my industry, unfortunately, contractors get a bad rap. And there's really good contractors out there. In fact, I'm part of a group of contractors that's international at this point. And we have a code of ethics. We actually are working on making contractors better, about raising the bar, making sure that there's financial understanding in the way they do business. Because to run a business truly and really create a good business means that you're financially sound, that you're able to really understand the inner workings of it, and you're able to, in the end, deliver upon what you say you're going to do. There are so many other contractors out there who will constantly be borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, Mary, and whoever. And we are so focused on the delivery of, okay, this is what the customer wants. We're going to review everything with the customer. We're going to communicate with the customer. We're going to deliver to the customer. And really, one of my favorite lines to say to people is, I can make you happy with your kitchen. Your therapist is really there for everything else. And the truth of the matter is, we used to just have installers that were not subcontractors. But really, what it was is also, we've noticed that the quality of trades has gone down dramatically. So now we've hired excellent plumbers full-time on staff as W-2 employees. We've hired excellent electricians. We've had to expand those services because we couldn't rely on subs anymore. And right now, countertops is really the only thing that we do not do in-house, but we have partnerships with 2 companies, one that services Virginia and DC, one that services Maryland. And our philosophy always has been, we deliver, we say what we're going to do, and we finish, and we make everyone happy. And it's not always easy, but you have to be able to create that and separate yourself from everyone else.
Sounds good. Emma, value proposition for the Ivy.
Yeah, so I want to say about Levinson as well, and I think it sort of connects to all of this, but we had a death in my family just a couple of weeks ago, and we just, automatically who you're going to work with if you're in the Jewish community in Baltimore. And it was my grandmother, and she was in a different state, but it's like, well, Saul Levinson will just sort of help us. They'll tell us they'll manage everything. And I think that sense of comfort and that sense of reliability and just sort of knowing who to turn to is a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable thing. So just thank you, Matt, and thank you to the family for 130 years in a community. But I think it really highlights just what's special about local business and what I think is sort of at the heart of what we hope is the value proposition of the Ivy, which is we want to be there for you because we care. And we care about books, and we care about our community, and we care about our city, and we just care about people. And so it's that sense of, in a world where, costs are rising and the supply chain is difficult and all of these things, it's that we are someone you want to turn to know what the book is, right? You can buy the book cheaper somewhere else. And I sometimes say, everyone knows where that somewhere else is. If you want to get a book as cheaply as possible with the least human contact, we aren't competing. You should go to the unnamed source. But if you want to have an experience and you want to know who to go to for that book, and you want to discover new things, and you want to have a conversation, come to us. And that, if I manage the finances of the business right, and if I create a sustainable business, then we'll get through the tough times in order to be able to sort of thrive during the sort of high periods. and we'll be able to be here for people for a really long time in order to create those experiences.
I love
Yeah.
Final question. What has the pandemic revealed to you about your business? Matt Levinson first.
So in the very beginning of the pandemic, I didn't think I can get through each day. It was so complicated and hard to run our business and knowing that we had to stay open and we had to keep our employees safe, and it was a lot of pressure. So I think we can get through anything. I don't think we ever had a plan for this. We always think of the plans in case every emergency happens, and we didn't have one for this. And we have really good people I rely on. We work as a team and we make good decisions. Not everyone was perfect, but I think it just taught us that, anything that happens, we'll get through it, take a deep breath and make good decisions, and it'll be okay.
Brett, how about you?
Well, I mentioned about people, but when our manufacturing plants were shutting down in Pennsylvania and we weren't getting any product in, and I knew we had to put boards up around the building essentially for at least, we didn't know how long. The first concern was really about, all right, what do we need to do to make sure everyone's safe? It's the middle of a pandemic. You can't just let everyone in your company go. So we decided to furlough with health benefits for all of our employees, and myself and the rest of the executive team were literally getting in line with people and helping them register for unemployment. And I think that was one really important thing, because I wanted people in my company to know how much I cared, but also that we were able to be a resource, and we were trying to constantly keep in touch with them. The other thing it really taught us is that sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And there's so many times in our lives we're always saying, oh, it'd be great if we had the time to do this. And we were always thinking about all these things that we needed to do for our business, but we were always focusing on the day-to-day operations instead of actually getting into how do we run a really great company. And so what we started doing with that slowdown and that time was really figure out, what do we need? What do we want to be? Who do we want to be? And how do we get there? And it was about saying, okay, Brett, you're great at sales, but guess what? You're retiring from sales. You've got a company to run. You've got to focus on the bigger picture here. Who's going to take over the operations? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And by really creating the best team possible, and giving responsibility, and sometimes it's really hard as an entrepreneur to let go of some responsibility, especially when it's your baby. I've learned to trust other people, but also grow personally and professionally because of it. And our company's been successful because of that. And I really believe that we were able to accomplish and really rethink because of how the pandemic, and that's one of the lessons, slow down a little bit. And we were able to—
Emma, same question to you. And before you answer, I can only imagine, your business is a social gathering place. You need people to come to your location. They gather and they read, they schmy around, etc. To have that taken away and shut down must have just been a dagger.
Yeah, it was, and it was, as it was, I think, for most businesses, each of them in different and distinct ways, just a wildly chaotic and stressful time of just each day figuring out what are the challenges and how should we adapt to them, and how can we adapt to them in ways that feel ethical and human. And I think that for us, it also converged for us with almost perfectly with this, the undertaking, the renovation of the property and our move into it. We started the renovation process in February of 2020. We were due to move into our new location according to the original timeline in June of 2020. And as the world knows, those months did not go as planned. And so I would just say those months were just a sort of endless series of adaptations in real time. There was no option but to be utterly reactive, because we were learning what the day held every single day for months on end. But I think, some of the same lessons were gleaned. What we really learned from that process and through that process is you want to build a really healthy organizational culture where people are happy, they feel valued, but also that the pace of work and the flexibility of work is enough that we can sustain that kind of period of adaptation. And we know how to sort of lean in one direction or the other. And I think we had sort of been working at a pace, especially in the sort of preceding year or two, where suddenly the sort of loss of daily operations, we hadn't we hadn't necessarily built systems that were really kind of sustainable. And so we've really put a lot of energy into rebuilding systems and making things a lot more systematic. And somewhat counterintuitively, the real reason for that is to make things kind of breathe a little better so that people sort of feel more human on a daily basis and don't feel like, oh, it matters so much that I get this thing done urgently by this time. But we built in enough time that if things take an extra day or two, it's okay. And no one's that stressed about it. And I think that is an amazing lesson that the pandemic taught us. And even if it was painful along the way, that we're just a happier, healthier organization because of it.
Sounds good. You guys have all been terrific. That'll be the final word for our podcast here this afternoon and this evening. Brett Cohen from Kitchen Saver, Matt Levinson, Levinson Brothers, and of course, Emma Snyder from the Ivy. You guys have been terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
And to our speakers, Thibault Manekin as well, Matt Levinson, Emma Snyder, and Brett Cohen, thank you. A warm and enthusiastic thank you to our sponsors, of course, the Ivy Bookshop, Jason Perlow, home team at Sotheby's, Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program at CCBC, Gourmet Girls, Kitchen Saver, Our House, Seawall Development, and Sal Levinson Brothers. Of course, to our presenting sponsor, the good folks at Nemphis Brow, offering big firm experience and boutique service with lawyers experienced in all aspects of business and corporate law. For more information, go to nemphosbrow.com, NEMPHOSBRAUE.com. Thanks to all who have watched and been on the lookout for future events, hopefully in person from here. Until then, I'm Gary Stein saying we'll see you next time.